Hi and a warm welcome back to the channel. In this video I'm going to talk about some of the most common seed sowing mistakes. Growing your own plants from seeds is such a remarkable task to do, and I absolutely love it. I never get tired of it, and I'm always in awe when I first see those lovely seedlings emerging from the soil. Sometimes we don't always get it right. Sometimes the conditions when we are sowing our seeds are not favourable for germination. So in this video I thought I'd talk about some of the most common mistakes that people can make when growing their own plants from seeds. The first thing is what we're going to grow the seeds in. Now, you can grow in anything provided it's got a capacity to hold the compost and also it has drainage holes. So the first common mistake is growing into something that hasn't got drainage holes. You're going to be watering these and you can't allow that water just to sit there in that container. You must allow something, so whether it's a pot, whether it's a tray, it's got to be something that has drainage holes in. And even these things like these fruit punnets you can get, they're ideal because they have holes already in the plastic. So that makes a free, perfect little planter. The next thing is the growing medium you're going to be using. So ideally you need to be using fresh compost. Now, whether you choose to use seed compost or multi-purpose compost, that is your choice. But it has to be sterile. Don't make the mistake of using old compost. Old compost has pathogens in it, little microorganisms that can cause the plants to be diseased. So ideally buy fresh compost and use only fresh compost for seed starting. Next we move on to the actual sowing of the seeds. Now, do not be tempted to sow too densely. If you sow too densely, the seedlings are going to be too packed together. When they start growing, they're going to be competing for light, competing for nutrition, and the problem is there is a condition that seeds can have which is called damping off disease, and that is usually caused by a fungus. Now, damping off can be seen by the seeds not germinating at all, or the seeds germinating and your little seedlings just collapsing all of a sudden without any warning. It just suddenly happens and you're thinking, what the hell is that? That is damping off. And what that can be caused by is too damper conditions, too humider conditions, and also too much overcrowding of your seedlings. So don't be too tempted to oversow. If you do want to grow lots and lots of seedlings, just use multiple plant pots, multiple trays, and just give them adequate space for them to grow. So you've got your tray or pot, you've got your sterile compost, you've got your seeds sown nice and sparingly over the surface of the compost. Next, one of the mistakes people make is putting compost over the top of the seeds if that seed requires light to germinate. So some seeds don't, some seeds are actually inhibited by light, and some seeds need light to germinate. So things like poppy seeds, foxglove seeds and antirrhinum seeds, if you were to put a thick layer of compost over the top of that, when you're sowing the seeds, it's going to inhibit germination and you're not going to see any plants coming up through the soil. So check your instructions on your seed packets, check online, and just make sure that the seeds you're sowing don't require light to germinate. If they do require light to germinate, you can either leave them uncovered or have something like vermiculite, which is a very light kind of medium, which when you put over the surface of seeds allows some light to actually come in. So I use vermiculite on most of our seeds, whether they require light or not, because this does allow some light to enter, and that then helps to have the seed to germinate. Another common mistake is sowing seeds at the wrong time of year. Some seeds require a period of cold, so we call this cold stratification. And this is what is emulated in nature. When the seeds drop from the flowers in the autumn, they then lie on the soil surface, they have a period of cold, a period of usually a moist and wet winter, and once we get into spring we have the higher temperatures, and that change between the cold and the warmer weather breaks the seed dormancy, and that then lets the seed germinate. So if you're going to be sowing seeds and you're sowing them in spring, so things for example like primula seeds or eryngium seeds, they require a cold period. So if you're going to sow them in spring, you're actually not going to get germination until the following spring. After that period, they've gone through the whole of the year and into the winter and back into the spring, when they will then germinate. So really you're wasting your time sowing these in the spring. You're better sowing seeds that need the cold treatment in the autumn and the winter, because then they're being exposed to that cold during the winter time and then exposed to the warmth in the spring, and that then allows the seeds to germinate. You're also not going to want to start growing seeds like half-hardy annuals such as cosmos in the autumn. Seeds like this should be sown in the springtime, where you can grow them on, plant them out after the risk of frost, and enjoy the flowers all through the summer and autumn. When the cold weather comes, they'll then naturally die with the cold snap. If you're sowing those kind of seeds in the autumn, you're going against the weather patterns, and you're going into the autumn and then into the winter. So basically you're not going to have a plant that's going to die because it's going to be too cold for it to grow. So getting the timings right when sowing seeds is very important. Again, you can check this up on the back of a seed packet and also online. Next we talk about the seeds themselves. Some seeds have a really good storage life, so you can keep them for many years, and others are best sown when they're fresh, so directly after collection. So on the back of seed packets you'll generally find a use by date. That isn't usually set in stone. You can sow after that point. The best thing to do, if you do have seeds that you've kept for a long time or that have gone past that use by date, is either sow a few and see what happens, or place a few on a damp piece of kitchen roll and see if you get germination. Germination you can start to see by the little roots starting to come out of the seed, and if they're all germinating, then those seeds are still fine. So one of the most common mistakes is sowing seeds that are old and not going to germinate because they've just gone past their best time of sowing. The next common mistake people do when growing seeds is not labelling the trays. Now sometimes it's easy to identify your seedlings, and that's fine, but if you're growing multiple plants, multiple varieties of the same plant, which we often do, it's easy to get them muddled up, especially when you start planting them out into their individual containers and you're moving them around, making space for other things around your garden and wherever you're growing them. We have a system that we tried last year which worked really well, and that was using these different coloured dots. So we were growing different varieties of tomatoes, different varieties of cosmos, and what we did on the label was we put little stickers. So a blue would be a certain variety, a yellow would be another variety, and a pink would be another variety. And then we can follow through with the pots. We placed one of these spotted colours on each pot, and then we can relate that to the actual plant that is corresponding to. And that just helped us last year to keep track of which plants were which. The next common mistake is not watering adequately after sowing the seeds. Now my tip here is place that tray into another tray that doesn't have any holes in, and pop your water in the tray and let those seeds soak up that moisture. When you start to see the surface, you can even feel it, when that's moist to the touch, you know that that tray and all that compost is thoroughly soaked. And at that point, take them out of the tray, and ideally, unless you're growing them on some kind of heated propagator or something where there's a lot of heat, that tray should not need really watering until you really see the seedlings starting to appear. So just keep an eye on it. Don't just leave these and just let them get onto their own devices. Keep an eye and make sure that they don't get too dry. If they get a little dry in the meantime, pop a bit more water in the bottom of the tray and allow that to be soaked up. The other common mistake, on the other hand, is too much water. So if I was to place these in a tray, pop some water in the bottom, let all that water soak up, and then just keep putting water in the bottom tray so that this whole thing is just saturated in loads and loads of water. The seeds are going to be sat in too much water. That can inhibit germination. it can cause the soil to be too damp, and it can also lead to the other problem, which is damping off. So the damp conditions and the over humid conditions can cause the seedlings to fail to germinate, or when they do germinate, can cause them to just collapse and die. So not too much water and not too little water. Getting that balance is the key. So now you've got your seeds sown, you've got them watered, you've made sure they need light or they don't need light, you've got the correct timing, you've got perfect conditions now. What we're now going to talk about is the actual temperature the seeds need to germinate. So generally seeds will need between around 15 degrees to about 25 degrees Celsius to germinate. Now some seeds will require less, some seeds will require a higher temperature. That's just a ballpark figure. So things like your cosmos seeds, which are half hardy, things like other kind of half hardy annuals, you're going to need to bring them into a warmer environment. So something like a window ledge inside your home is perfect. Things like the hardy annuals, so things like the poppies, the cornflowers, they can germinate outdoors, so you don't need to provide such a high temperature for those. And this goes back to another point that I made earlier, sowing at the right time of year. If you've got so for example a cool season crop of lettuce, the germination for that is going to be during the cool season, so it's not going to need a higher temperature as what the actual timing of the season allows. Seeds that do require a high temperature, there's not much point in sowing those in the autumn or winter, is there? Because it's just not going to germinate. The heat is not going to be there at that time of year, particularly in the UK anyway. And the last thing I want to say, which is a common mistake, is sowing too early. So I know you get very, very anxious, you've gone through the winter, you're dying to get sowing, it's January now, and you want to get sowing. So you think, I'm just going to pile as many seeds as I can, I'm going to grow as much as I can and use all the window ledges in the house, I'm going to put them wherever I can and get plants growing as soon as possible. It's a common mistake that we've all made, and I've made it too. And the problem is, at that time of year, the available light is still not very high. And what happens is, you might get germination, but you're going to get leggy seedlings unless you can provide an environment which has artificial light using, say, grow lights. If you're just using your window ledge, it's not going to be enough during the winter time, as we're still in January or February, to get these plants growing adequately. You're going to end up with spindly plants that have been reaching for the light, and the problem there is they are not going to grow effectively. And whilst you can do some things to help that by, when you transplant them, planting them deeper, that can help to prevent the legginess on seedlings. But if you've got tons and tons that you're trying to grow and they're all like that, you're really kind of growing too early, and you're better waiting until we get into, say, March, when we've got lighter nights, the temperature's starting to get a little warmer, and the conditions are more favourable for growing strong, healthy plants. If you are having problems getting your seeds to germinate, I do hope this video has given you some ideas and maybe a starting point to look at as to why the reason you may be failing. The thing is, seeds want to grow. It's inbuilt in them to want to germinate. So providing you provide the conditions for that germination, they will germinate and grow away. That's what they're inherent to do. It's just getting those right things in place, getting the right conditions for them to do that. Thank you so much for watching. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Any comments you have, drop them as always in the comments box below the video. We will see you very soon on the next video. In the meantime, happy gardening, take care, and happy seed sowing.